Welcome back to the Financial Symmetry Show. Chad Smith and Mike Eklund with you this week. And our goal with this episode, we had hoped that the Hurricanes hockey team was still going to be in the Stanley Cup playoffs by the time this aired, but unfortunately, they did get swept in the Eastern Conference Finals. And Canes craziness was all around our area. So we were putting together a message around hockey and financial planning. There's a lot of excitement this time of year that comes with the Stanley Cup, right? And people always, if you ever read much about personal finance or financial planning, you can really uncover some quotes that have come from hockey that have parallels to financial planning. Now, I didn't grow up as a hockey fan, unlike our resident guest co-host here, Mr. Mike Eklund. He plays hockey on the regular, so he may have even more points today to make. But some of the famous ones that we kind of see and reference from time to time is, and I think several of them, right, are attributable to Wayne Gretzky. He always refers to, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck is going. That was how he framed that he had success in his life. Anytime you talk about amazing growth in businesses, they'd call it hockey stick growth, right? To mimic the shape of the hockey stick there. And then, of course, that famous strategy in hockey of pulling the goalie. And there's been papers written on this, comparing it to other sports and the risk involved and when you do it in the game, because it can increase your odds of scoring, but also really increases the risk of losing, of course, if you don't have somebody guarding the goal.
No, you did a great job. I'm very impressed. I'm very excited for this episode as a former and current hockey player, but also hockey fan. It's always fun to talk about one of my favorite sports. A hockey game has 3 periods for those that are not familiar. And so we're going to talk about 3 examples of how that you could help fine tune your financial life as you look to your ideal retirement, especially your ideal retirement skate, we could call it. Really, the first one is, in a hockey game, you're developing a game plan. And how do you prepare for the unexpected? It's a good example if those that have watched the Carolina Hurricanes, the first game of the series against Florida Panthers, they went to 4 overtimes. That was a long, long game. You don't know if your retirement is going to go according to plan. And so Chad's going to talk a little bit about what to do trying to prepare for those uncertain events that occur.
Yeah, and we talk to people in that stage of life, generally where they are dealing with a lot of complicated decisions in their 40s and 50s, right? They're on that journey of that pre-retirement kind of runway, moving to try to create this ideal retirement. And the way that we start that with people is putting together their retirement game plan by creating a comprehensive financial plan. And that is customized to each individual or family because goals differ, of course. And this thing changes over time, right? So that's why it really requires updating almost annually to update values, to see how things have changed, to see new opportunities involved there. One of the things that we find that people make or sometimes leave out of the equation when they're running retirement calculators is considering those semi-regular expenses, that spending, those big expenses that pop up that you maybe think about in the middle of the year when you want to spend a little extra on the house and do a house update, or a new car, and that new car maybe is costing a little bit more than you anticipated. I remember early on in my career, I would put car purchases in plans and they'd be like, I will never spend that much on a car. 7 years later, yeah, that's how much we spent, maybe a little bit more. So it's important to get these numbers down. The modeling of the scenarios, that can give you a lot of peace of mind in making a decision, because when it comes down to big financial decisions, most of the time you're wondering, will I be okay if I go ahead and do this now, or do I need to wait until later? And I think having the peace of mind to do it now can give you more balance in life and also help you to feel like you're taking advantage of the hard-earned wealth that you've earned. So we do that through scenario planning. Helps you determine the feasibility of those decisions. Which accounts do you need to withdraw from? How is it best to withdraw to cover these expenses? Things like, we want to build a second home. Do you want to retire early? Do you want to maybe give more to your kids at some point? Do you need to cover areas that you haven't thus far? Life insurance, estate planning, how best to do that? And then how will that impact all of these decisions? How will that impact the long-term picture? But to Mike's point on the 4 overtimes, you got to be flexible to adjust, right? Because sometimes things either go longer, you live much longer than you expect. You might have a health issue that pops up that changes the perspective of how you were thinking about things will go. And then, of course, when it comes to investing, we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. But when you get a tough year like 2022, how is your plan impacted by that? And then how are you reacting to that? Because that's an important aspect long term, because no retirement strategy is a one size fits all.
To your comment to begin with, like a retirement game plan, with the Hurricanes or any hockey team besides one team that will win it, they'll always have next season. to think about. As for your retirement, you really only have one shot. So you got to make sure you do it right. And that's where I think going back to, the reason why a plan is so important is because it gives you that peace of mind and knowledge that you're going to be okay. And the importance of, a plan is not a one-time event, it's a process. And that plan needs not only to be created, but also needs to be updated, because your life is going to change. It is going to have 4 overtimes or whatever, curveballs or penalties or whatever is going to happen in the hockey game is going to happen in your retirement plan. And having that plan and being able to adjust it is extremely important. So I think that's a good start for the first example or period of this hockey metaphor podcast. And so the next one, talking more, if you watch the game recently, or the one that was on Wednesday night on May 24th, there was a lot of penalties, and so there would be power play. So that's our team has a one-man advantage, and so Chad's going to talk a little bit more about kind of what to do when you have that. You as a soon or retiree, you have that power play, that man advantage. What things you could be taking advantage of that only may happen certain times of your retirement.
So we're moving into the second period with a 1-goal lead. Is that what I'm hearing here? Okay.
Right now you got a 1-goal lead, and there's other team just got a penalty, so it's now is the time to put another puck in the net.
So we're talking here about how to maximize your power plays, right? Whenever you get a penalty in hockey, you get a power play, and one man from the other team goes into the penalty box, right? So you have an extra player, you have an advantage. Many times we'll see people that understand it, but aren't always taking full advantage of these opportunities. So we wanted to highlight a couple of these. One, of course, we talk about in many podcasts, is automating your savings, right? It's easier to do this with 401ks, but there's other opportunities as well through your employer that you can do. Sometimes you may have a deferred comp plan in your 40s and 50s. That might be an opportunity for you. And we have a podcast on that we'll list in the show notes that you could find more detail there. There's other known tax-friendly savings opportunities if it makes sense, right? If you're in a high income tax bracket, you're trying to find pre-tax savings opportunities where it's not being taxed at the higher rate, so that you can ideally take it out at a lower rate down the road. If you're in a lower tax bracket in your earlier years of starting out, Roth IRAs make sense. If you're under that income limit, generally that might always make sense if you're having that after-tax savings build up in a bank account or in a brokerage account. You could shift some over to the Roth to take advantage of that and let it grow tax-free. You can also take advantage of a backdoor Roth. We talked about this a lot in different episodes on our podcast if your income is too high, but there are multiple steps involved in that to make sure that you hit. And we often see accountants not filling out the correct forms on the tax return, just sometimes because they don't know that happens. So it takes some extra steps to make sure you do it right, and we'll list an episode in the show notes on how we do that. Also, a simple one, but one that might not be hit all the time, is make sure you're hitting that employer match. That is extra money in your 401k that you can take advantage of. We love Roth conversions in low tax years. Okay, so this is one where really it's maybe after you've retired, or if you've early retired, or if you've been laid off in this environment, then you may have a lower income tax year. That could be an opportunity to where you could pull in, of course, money from a 401k or a traditional IRA, and then get it into a Roth IRA, and it can grow tax free. And then you have that triple tax savings account that we love, is the health savings account. If you have a higher deductible health insurance policy that you can save in for tax-free medical expenses over time. And Mike, did you have a few others where you see advantages that we encounter?
Yeah, there's just a few others, the qualified charitable distributions, and, to try and delay or maximize your timing of when you start Social Security if you're married or a widow or such. But I think the key takeaway I take from this chat is that there's a lot to remember. There are a lot of things, and if those things came through, you're like, well, I'm not sure if I'm doing this. I'm not sure if I'm doing that. Am I doing this correctly? That's where, like, a hockey team has a coach, and that coach helps figure out who's going to play on the power play and figure out, what is the game plan. I think that's where a professional advisor would be very helpful. Obviously we're biased because we're fee-only financial planners at Financial Symmetry, but this is where, if you're missing that opportunity, you'll end up having to pull the goalie at the end of the game because you don't have the lead in the game. By not taking advantage of these opportunities, like the savings or the right type of accounts for tax purposes, or the Roth conversions like Chad mentioned in lower years. What that does, that just gives you a bigger lead. When you get to the third period, you're not worrying about pulling the goal. You're not worrying about shooting for the fences. You're pretty comfortable, and you have that peace of mind. There are a lot of things there, and there are a lot of good advice that Chad mentioned. But I think my key takeaway is if you're listening to this and saying, I don't think I'm doing all this, or I'm missing something, that's where a professional fee-only financial advisor would be, a a big benefit to your life.
And you can do that at financialsymmetry.com on our homepage. If you are interested, there's a talk to an advisor button there that goes straight to us, that you can set up a time to have a free conversation to discuss it and see what we could do, if we'd be a good fit to help you or not.
With that segue, so we finished the second period now we're on the third period. And the next kind of discussion topic is kind of winning the face-off with your investment fears or avoiding that big mistake. And so Chad's going to talk about some tips on that front as well.
And the reason I put this in the third period is because generally that's when your investment accounts and savings are much larger, right? Later in life. And that's when the penalty of a big mistake can be much more harmful to your journey. And often that...
It's like a double major.
Yeah. That's also whatever you're...
That's a 10-minute penalty versus a 2-minute. Sorry, go.
No,
That's my hockey reference. I had to throw it in there.
I like it. It's... you're generally a little more, you can be a little more fearful or jaded at that point in your life too, because you're getting closer to that time when you're not going to be earning income any longer. And that can create some natural fears, I'd call them. They're instinctual, right? And it's hard to fight against that. In order to set yourself up to win this face-off with those investment fears, we have some philosophies and general investment principles we've discussed in different podcast episodes. One of them is 135. Where we talked about our 3-step process. We also have general investment principles on our website that you can look at that could help you think through this. But we feel this because often the pain of an investment loss is twice as strong as the pleasure that's derived from an investment gain. So we're much more in that mindset of protect. We got to protect, right? It's kind of like in football, when you're playing the prevent defense late in the game, often some bad things can happen in those moments because you're trying to be defensive, but it's not working as well as what you did in the first part of life and being aggressive in savings and some other things. The way we approach this is first asking some questions, right, to understand your tolerance. And then, do you have the appropriate stock allocation for your goals? First of all, how do you get to a point where you can have, understand what your stock allocation is? Do you have an investment philosophy that you're adhering to? A certain amount of stocks that you want to hold, or how much in safety do you need over the next 7 years to make sure that you have your expenses covered? Those are some of the cornerstones of the philosophies that we try to set up. And then a strategy is not as effective if you don't have a monitoring process for it to understand when things change, how are you going to adjust and when are you going to adjust? And that's a difficult thing because emotions can take control in those moments when you're at extremes. And we may be, we're experiencing an example of that now with a debt ceiling debate. I mean, we've been through this many, many times and things have worked themselves out, but it feels in the moment, you can always come up with a rationale that says, I think this time could be different, right? And it makes you wonder what you need to do to maybe be more defensive in your investment strategy. So that brings you to the next question. And how are you set up? Are you diversified? Do you have money in areas allocated to where you could take advantage if things go one way or another? And that's an important aspect that a lot of people maybe don't have spread out as much as they think they do, right? Because a lot of the funds that you're offered in a 401k may be targeted in one area or another that has done well recently, because past performance still rules in a lot of decision making in the investment world, and that can be harmful in the long run. Take a look at the investment principles. I know Mike has a lot of thoughts on this. In general, investing is simple, but it is not easy because it requires discipline over decades, right? And sometimes that discipline means doing nothing in the face of feeling like you should do something. And that is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that I would go back, and Chad mentioned this to begin with, but I always still love Wayne Gretzky's quote that, skate where the puck is going versus where it has been. And I think we see that firsthand, especially individuals on their own, which is common, where they skate where the puck has been, which I mean, what has done well lately, I'm going to go buy this stock or mutual fund or ETF because it's done well lately, where really our approach and what your approach should be is you should be like Wayne Gretzky and skate where the puck is going. And there's a little more thought and research and process involved in that, but that is a more of a disciplined approach, because unfortunately what we find is investors typically skate where the puck has been, and that ends up impacting their long-term results negatively. And we can share a slide from BlackRock on that shows kind of what's the results of clients who actually skate, what the past performance they focus on, their future performance is much lower than folks that don't follow the herd, which is effectively, skate where the puck is going. So I think that's the first thing I would mention. The second thing is I'm always, obviously one of the legendary investors of our time is Warren Buffett, and his comment that still sticks with me to this day is that the stock market is a device from transferring wealth from the impatient to the patient. And we see that firsthand, that folks that they want the returns to happen tomorrow. And you have to be patient. It takes time. Returns it's not the same every year. You'll have good years and bad years, as Chad mentioned in 2022. You need to stick to your strategy, the disciplined strategy. If you don't have a strategy, like once again, as we mentioned before, that's a great time to work with a fee-only professional like Financial Symmetry, because trust me, you only have one game. You don't have a next season, because you don't want to make that big mistake that Chad referenced before, because you might not be able to recover from it. This is not like the Hurricanes can play, they're going home, they're going to rest, they're going to get ready for next year. Unfortunately, you only have one game. So make sure you don't, make that big mistake. And then the final thing is, and this is kind of speaking of the debt ceiling and the media, but I still love the comment, is that pessimists sound smart and optimists make money. So just keep that in mind as you listen to the media. You'll hear always reasons not to invest, because pessimists do sound smart, but at the end of the day, the optimists are the ones that make money. And that's kind of our approach here at Financial Symmetry.
Yeah, you don't have to look hard to find reasons not to invest. That's a great quote there. And while we're sad today that the hurricane season is over, you may be just starting taking a look at your financial journey. And that's why we wanted to put this together today, to give you just a different perspective on thinking about how to view your wealth journey. And that is something we put a lot of thought and focus and energy and care into every day here at Financial Symmetry. So if you'd like to get started on taking a look at that, you can certainly check out our website, or check out a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor near you if you're in another state. And maybe you can pick up the Carolina Hurricanes as your team next year if you're in another state. So thanks for joining us. You can subscribe if you don't want to miss the next episode, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.